Hi, my name is Eric, and welcome to the Microbrowsers Nuts and Bolts session at ImageCon 2020. We are going to be talking about the nuts and bolts of microbrowsers. And the first question you might ask, let's start at the very beginning. What is a microbrowser? When you are chatting with your friends and you drop a link in the chat, your messaging app actually goes out to that URL, fetches the HTML at the other end of it, pulls some things out of it, makes a few more requests for sub-resources maybe, and presents the results of all that fetching in a chat bubble. What do we call something that goes out to the network and fetches and then presents HTML? We call it, of course, a browser. But these are teeny tiny little browsers, and they're very simple-minded browsers. They're not like Chrome or Safari. Simple-minded browsers didn't really have a good ring to it, so we picked another name for the buzzword, and that was microbrowsers. And microbrowsers come in many shapes and sizes. Here we see Slack, Facebook Messenger, and WhatsApp all fetching the same link. All these different mediums represent one thing to you, the site owner, and that's a golden opportunity. You know, no amount of marketing budget in the world can buy you what you can get from person-to-person word-of-mouth sharing, whether people are sharing articles, news stories, cute cats, recipes, gift ideas, whatever. You know, I don't know if my wife and I have made a major purchasing decision in the last year or maybe ever without sharing some kind of link of some kind of product or something in our shared iMessage thread. What microbrowsers do is they give you, the site owner, a window into that conversation, an opportunity to present your best self as part of that word of mouth sharing within a tiny little chat bubble. So I guess for a little bit more about why you should care about microbrowsers and what their impact to your business can be, I would encourage you to go look at Jason Curry's talk on demand, a summary of Cloudinary's 2020 State of the Visual Media Report. But if you want to know how to actually design and present, produce content for these little guys, you're in the right talk. That's what we're going to be talking about here in this session. So what are you going to walk away with? Hopefully a few key takeaways. The first of which is use Open Graph meta tags. There is one clear standard for these kinds of communicating with these sorts of browsers, and that's OG tags. Second, at a very minimum, for every page that you put on the web, please just use short and hopefully thoughtful text descriptions. That's the baseline of what gets shown to people when they share links in these social messaging platforms. So try to make it snappy and try to make it impactful. But the heart of the talk really is about visual communication. You know, these browsers open up a little window for you to tell a visual story. And this talk is going to be about why that's so important that you take advantage of it and how to do it with some of Cloudinary's tooling. And lastly, we'll talk about tracking microbrowser activity, which is really important, but unfortunately quite difficult. But let's start off with a concrete example. Let's say that I'm an e-commerce site owner, I'm in the shoe business, and I'm trying to sell this cool shoe. So what if someone comes and sees the shoe and decides to share it with a friend? What happens by default? If I've done absolutely nothing to consider the microbrowser experience, when that link gets shared, the title of the page from the title element gets pulled in, and also the favicon is a piece of visual decoration, at least in iMessage here. That's what gets shown. And so that's good, but obviously we can make this better. And the way that we can make it better is by using Open Graph tags. Now, Open Graph tags have sort of floated to the top. There used to be a number of different competing standards for how to kind of give this whole page summary information for third parties like microbrowsers who are trying to extract a very quick summary of the whole page. There used to be Twitter cards, schema.org had a whole bunch of standards around this. Microformats even played in this space a little bit. But every microbrowser platform looks for and will intelligently interpret Open Graph tags. So just publish Open Graph tags. If you want full documentation, it's a rich set of standards. It's all documented at the ogp.me URL up at the top, but we're going to tell you just the basics of what you need to know here in this talk. To speak of the basics, I've started here with the 3 required fields anytime you use an Open Graph or want to send any Open Graph information. Those are the canonical URL, the OG URL of the page, which is just the page's own URL, but stripped of any link decoration, UTM codes, anything like that. Then the second is the OG title, which is the title A lot of times it'll be the same as the title of the page, but sometimes those page titles can get pretty long as they have some extra information stuffed in there. So this is just what you want to be presented in bold as the textual title of the page in a microbrowser context. Lastly, we have the OG description, which is your opportunity to add a little bit more color. Let's see what a couple of different platforms do with that information. So once we've added this to our cool shoe page, the iMessage actually isn't looking that different than it did before we added them. Now we're getting the OG title rather than the page title, but we're still getting the favicon, and iMessage actually just kind of throws away the description. It doesn't do anything with it. WhatsApp here on the right actually does show the description there in lighter gray text underneath. And if you're a certain sort of developer or designer, this might worry you that these different platforms are doing different things with the same content. You might wonder, is that okay? And to answer this question, I'll point you to one of my favorite little single serving sites on the internet. Actually, don't remember the URL. I'll have to Google for it. Do websites need to look exactly the same in every browser? And if I'm just feeling lucky here, I get the answer back that no, they don't. So this site is a relic of the HTML5 era. The same HTML content does not need to be presented exactly the same way in Internet Explorer 5 as it does in Chrome 84, right? And that's doubly true in the microbrowser context. Your job as a developer is just to sort of give as much information as you can and let each of these platforms in this highly constrained environment do what they think is best with that information and not worry too much that they all do different things with it. So we've talked about textual information. We've talked about the fact that you have to give up some amount of control when you're playing in this space. Now I want to talk about the power of visual communication. I can tell you about a cool shoe, but what's more important and what's so much more impactful than telling is showing. If I can show you what that shoe looks like, and just as much real estate, almost, I can deliver a much more powerful, idea of what this thing is, why you should care about it. And in order to do that in the microbrowser context, we use maybe my favorite open graph tag, which is the OG image tag. And so that's the property name, the content, you just drop in a URL of any old image resource. So if we drop in the URL of the hero image from our e-commerce site of that cool shoe, what do we get in iMessage? We get that hero image. It shows up right on top of the title there. And I think, this is the most basic and important step. If for every page that you publish, please use good textual information. But for anything that you can, adding this visual richness is just a huge opportunity. And we can take it even further. I think it's natural as developers to think of these microbrowser preview images as just scraped pieces of metadata. Just do what I did. Throw that hero image from the page in here. It'll add some visual flavor, add some context to what the link is. But I want to implore you to think about designing this little patch of screen, treating it like a canvas within which you can really tell a story. Once a person shares a URL with another person for whatever reason, what do you want to show? What do you want to show that person? And if you work on any kind of scale, it's not practical to manually design or hire designers to craft individual little microbrowser previews for every one of your pages. And that's where a tool like Cloudinary really comes in and really shines by providing a rich set of tools for collaging images, annotating images, creating images through URL-based syntax. Cloudinary lets you automate this kind of thing across your whole site and all your properties. For instance, here's that URL of our bare shoe hero image. Let's say you want to add some piece of context to this. You don't just want a shoe floating in the air. You want to say, hey, this is a shoe for sale. And actually, this is its price. So I can add a text layer to my image using the L text transformation in Cloudinary. I'm going to set it in 70-point rubato. And you have to URL encode weird characters, but that %24 is a $sign. I'm saying that this shoe costs $59.95. Now I'm going to stick that price in the northwest corner of the image, the upper left, set it, give it some margins away from the edges of the image, and give it an almost black but not quite black color. What does that look like? Voila! Now we have a shoe, and not only do we have that same image from the site, now we've created a new microbrowser specific image, which is taking some of the information that surrounded that image on the actual page and sticking it into the image so that it's visible in a microbrowser context. So how far can you take this thing? Well, for this example, I ran a little wild. I added a few more text layers and image layers. And if you want to experiment with what can be done, adding Layers, I can't recommend just fiddling around in Cloudinary's console enough. There's an edit tab. You can start to layer things on, change how things look, and get visual feedback in real time. And just consulting Cloudinary's documentation can break some of this down. I'm not going to do it all now, but you can create stuff like this. So now we have the title of the product, the price, a rating, the alternate colors that this product is available in, and a little only 3 in stock piece of text that really is going to drive you to click through. So this is a bunch of the surrounding information that exists on the HTML file. We've packed it all into one JPEG so that it can be visible in this microbrowser context. We've taken what was just a floating picture of a shoe and given it, enriched it with all of this extra information. This is, one concrete example. I want to give you a couple of others that we don't walk through in quite so much detail. My friend, my ex-colleague, Colin Bendel, wrote this article for TechCrunch about microbrowsers and link previews specifically in Slack. And in this article, he drew up an example down here, of what the article itself looked like, both what it would look like if no effort had been put into microbrowsers at all. It's just a URL there. And then that middle image is what the real link preview for this URL looked like in iMessage. And on the right, we kind of did a thought experiment saying, if you could, really design this, what would you want to do? And you would want to give it consistent branding. So anyone who shares this URL is going to immediately know it's a TechCrunch piece. You would want people to know, oh, this is an article. It looks like an article on TechCrunch. It's got an author, publishing date, a number of comments. You can kind of see how popular this article is. And then real tiny there, but there's some extra metadata. You see a published date, how fresh it is, the reading time. All this stuff you can kind of tell people about what they're about to click on and really make it more of a designed experience. Another example. So this is a website from Mita, what appears to be, I've never been, now I want to go, a very delicious restaurant in Boston. I chose this URL because they have just an amazing selection of really beautiful photography down here. Scroll a little bit further. Yeah, that just shows you, delicious looking food and just a beautiful considered space. And this photography, these images are a real resource, and they are not being exploited right now in how Mita does its microbrowser presentation at all. That's what actually happens when you share this URL is on the left. If someone shared that URL with me, I would assume that was an art museum. You just have the logo type and no information about what the business actually is or does or sells. On the right, I've taken the liberty to take some of that beautiful photography from their site and collage it together along with that branding, that logo. And now I have, a beautiful restaurant that I want to go to. I want to eat that food. I want to meet this happy person. It's a richer idea of what is actually on the other end of that link, and what that link actually represents out in the real world. Last example, this is a fun one. So answers.com, right now, what they send as a microbrowser preview is just their big old logo. But what is really important and why people are going to want to click on that link is to see the answer to the question. The question is really what's going to drive the engagement here. So you can design it. You can just take textual content, give it some thoughtful typography, slap a subtle little logo down there, and give someone a big honking target to click on so that they know, now I want to know if a bumblebee flies into someone's head, does it die? I'm going to click that link. All right. So we've talked a lot about images. I want to spend some time talking about video. So again, I'm going to point you to Jason's talk in the State of the Visual Media Report, where he goes into some detail about the importance of video on the web in 2020. And if you are dealing with video on the web, how can you start to fit that video into a microbrowser context? I've worked up another example here. Let's say you have a real estate site, and let's start playing this video. And let's say you're trying to sell this very nice, very expensive house. Well, first thing you're going to do is you're going to produce a beautiful drone video of it and get some nice sweeping pans of the interior of the house too, and put that up on a website. And now you should think about, if someone is sharing this URL with someone else, maybe an interested buyer, how can you present as much of this rich information as possible within that microbrowser context? First things first, let's take within the Open Graph image tag, let's actually just put our video URL, but change that .mp4 extension into a .jpg extension. And with Cloudinary, what this does is it takes the video, Cloudinary will take that video, pick the middle frame out. So from the exact middle of the video, it'll do a screen capture basically of that frame, render it to a JPEG, and now you have taken a whole video and converted it into an image. And now you have some visual information about the house there in your microbrowser preview for basically free. You did nothing. So that's cool. What's cooler is that Cloudinary can actually be smarter about which frame that it picks. So, if you just change the extension, you get the middle frame. If you set the start offset transformation to auto, Cloudinary will actually look at the whole video, and figure out what it thinks is the best poster frame that represents the whole video using some machine learning, artificial intelligence smarts. And so what Cloudinary does then is actually pick this great poster image that has, the establishing shot of the house, along with some textual information like the title right there. So this is a much better preview than that old picture of the bed. But how can we take it further? So in addition to an OG image tag, there's also an Open Graph video tag. And so the first thing to try out here, let's just dump this whole video into that Open Graph video tag. Now, this is a 3-minute long video, high res. I think it's pushing 100 megabytes. So what happens? What Imessage does is it picks the image tag that we provided, uses that as a poster frame, and then gives you a little play widget, and a button. And if you click that button, the video will pulse here for a few seconds, as it loads. And then that whole video, that 3-minute long video, high res, is actually loaded into iMessage and starts playing in full. Now, it's muted, but this is kind of amazing. We've got a video here playing. It required some user interaction, but it is possible. So, some notes on this. First and most importantly, videos in microbrowsers, I think, are iMessage only. In my limited sort of informal testing, that was the only platform that I could get video content to show up in or play in. And like I said, that video is muted, and it's actually looped. So those are two important things to consider. But the third thing is actually pretty exciting. If that video is small enough, if it loads fast enough, iMessage will actually autoplay it instead of throwing up that play button that requires the user to agree to load and play the video. iMessage will just do it automatically, which is a huge opportunity. So let's try to take advantage of it. So there's our bare video URL up there at the top. And it's a Cloudinary URL, so we can add some transformations to it. So let's do some things to try to shrink it down. First of all, let's actually shrink it down. Take the width, I think it was a 1920 wide video. Let's shrink it down to 620 pixels wide. Different iMessage and microbrowser windows are obviously different widths. This is a ballpark that makes it small and crisp enough for most people. The second thing, I've set the AC, which is audio codec, to none. That strips out the audio file, which is going to save some more bytes. And no one's ever going to hear that in a microbrowser context anyway. I've set the quality, the Q parameter there, to auto, which is an awesome thing that Cloudinary does. So video encoding is a complex field. Even within a given format, there are many different knobs and settings that you can turn to sort of tune a video to be optimally compressed. With QAuto, Cloudinary figures all of that out for you, and you get an optimal video for just a few characters in the URL. And lastly, and maybe the most exciting thing to demo, I've used the ePreview. That's the effect parameter. So I'm using the preview effect, and I'm giving that ePreview parameter a secondary parameter, which is that I want the duration to be 15. So what is this doing? I'm telling Cloudinary to take a 3-minute video and chop it up and edit it down to a 15-second summary video. And this actually works amazingly well. Again, it requires some fancy AI stuff that we have, but when I have all of these transformations and dump it into my OG video tag, if someone shares that link, this is what they're going to see. It's an auto-played 15-second version of that whole 3-minute video. This, I think, is really cool. Getting the still image out of the bed is much cooler than just having an address, right? Getting an intelligent still image of the ideal poster image for the video in there was even better. But actually having an auto-played summary video, I mean, this is this is great. This really gives you a sense of what the page is about, what the house is about. So that's super cool. And as long as we're talking about super cool stuff, I wanted to tease you a little bit with some future Cloudinary R&D. So ePreview right now, I showed you the 15-second ePreview. If you actually make that any less, like here's a 6-second ePreview video, ePreview says, you know what, I can't turn 3 minutes into 6 seconds, so and show you very much at all. So I'm just going to take 6 seconds out of one of those open establishing shots, and there's no cuts, there's no vision of the interior of the house or any of the other angles. So this kind of happens a lot. So we've been working on some technology called what we call time warp, in which Cloudinary not only edits the video down by chopping it up, it actually also speeds and slows down the playback of those shots that it picks out in order to create something that like looks really cinematic and can also pack in a lot more information into a much shorter amount of time. So the time warp, 6-second time warp version of this ePreview looks like this. We get a bunch of different shots. The speeding up and slowing down gives it a certain amount of drama. I don't know. I love this. It's an R&D thing. We're working on it. I have nothing to announce about when something like this might be available, but it's cool to show off, so I wanted to take the opportunity to show it off. So that's enough imaginary tech. Let's talk about the real world again, using a couple examples from Amazon.com. Amazon actually does a pretty good job with microbrowsers and previews generally, and a particularly good job around video. I'm not sure if they just give good tooling to their sellers and their sellers take advantage of it, or whether how much of this is them themselves. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is the end user experience. So this is a dog bed that I bought last week. And when I shared the link with my wife, I got this little microbrowser preview that shows exactly what I was worried about when it came to this dog bed, which was how easy it is to remove the cover and clean it. So we get that little video, and then we get a nice little slideshow of an actual dog enjoying the bed and the logo, the brand of the company that sells it. So I thought this was unexpected. This was cool. I was working on this talk, and then this video popped up in my feed, and it got me thinking. Those two little images at the end really are a slideshow. When I had the media preview, I wanted to fit a bunch of images into one little microbrowser preview window, and I did that by creating a collage. Another way to get a bunch of images into one image is to create a slideshow. Cloudinary actually has a tool to do this now. It outputs animated GIFs, which is not really optimal. So I am going to punt on this and say that we will have something to announce soon about creating videos from images, hopefully very shortly. I wish I was in place for me to talk about during this talk now, but it's not. But please stay tuned for some slideshow functionality from Cloudinary. Last video I wanted to show you. Around the Cloudinary offices, one game that is very popular is Taki, which is a Uno-like game. And when you share the Amazon page for it, what shows up in the preview is this how to play Taki video, which is actually pretty cool. It gives you a sense of the gameplay. It's quick, it's fun, it's fast. The game has a fun visual style. But this video is meant to explain how to play Taki, and it is not able to do that in this context because it is muted. The main way that information is being conveyed is with an audio voiceover, and that audio voiceover is not present in this context. How could we have added that? If we had audio content that we wanted to convey, the way to do it is with subtitles. And I'm happy to say that Cloudinary does have some released functionality around subtitles, which is really great. So any video that you have in Cloudinary, you can throw it over to Google's Cloud Speech API, which will give you a annotated time text file that turns that audio into text, and that text is all timed, so it appears at certain times in a VTT file. You can then point Cloudinary to that VTT file, and it will bake those text subtitles into the video so that they actually show up as the video plays. If you have a video that you're showing in a web context, you probably want to keep those subtitles as textual subtitles in a track element on the video element or in whatever video player that you're using. But in this microbrowser context where you really want to bake that information into the video because you only have one video that you get to send over the wire, this is exactly what you want. And it makes sure that you can keep that information as part of the video and convey it to the end user, even in this highly constrained context. Okay, so testing. I'm sad to say that there aren't a lot of good tools for testing microbrowser content. Let's say you've put all this effort into crafting it, designing it. Now you want to see what it looks like on a wide range of devices. That's difficult. I will recommend Facebook has this tool which allows you to validate a page's open graph information and make sure that you haven't missed anything or made some typo. And that's great as far as it goes. But there's really no substitute for getting a sense of the diversity of ways that the different platforms interpret that open graph data, then loading it on real devices with real apps. And there's just no good automated way to do that. It's actually a good product opportunity, maybe for Cloudinary, maybe for one of you. But it's a tool I think should exist. Okay, another thing that's difficult, measuring impact. So when you have a microbrowser and it goes out and loads that HTML, unlike a regular grown-up browser, it is not going to run JavaScript. And that means that none of your JavaScript-based analytics, like Google Analytics, is going to run. So to Google Analytics, these microbrowsers do not exist. Your only opportunity to actually see this activity is by looking at your raw HTTP access logs. And figuring out what's a microbrowser and what's a regular browser and basically just what's what in raw logs is very difficult because user agent strings are just a complete mess. Like, for instance, Imessage, which we've been showing all these examples in this talk through. You would hope that when it pinged out and grabbed a piece of HTML as part of that request, it would identify itself as Imessage. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It identifies itself as pretty much everything else. And serves up a pack of lies. So it calls itself Mozilla, which is not true. It says that it's running on a Macintosh, which is almost certainly not true. Specifically, an Intel Mac running OS X 10.11.1, that is definitely a lie. Apple WebKit, maybe true. KHTML, sure. LightGecko, I don't know. Safari, whatever. The most egregious two lies here are on this last line, where iMessage claims to be a Facebook and a Facebook bot, and also the Twitter bot. And nowhere in here does it say that it's iMessage. So these are hard to find and hard to identify if you're looking at your raw access logs. Figuring out what's what is difficult. Why is iMessage lying like this? iMessage is lying like this because it wants to be greedy. It wants to get the content that servers are tailoring specifically for the Twitter bot or specifically for the Facebook bot. And so it calls itself that in hopes that servers will give it all that sweet microbrowser information that has been custom tailored for those bots. But at least iMessage, unlike Facebook and unlike Twitter, leaves any residue at all in your access logs. iMessage is a decentralized microbrowser, which means that every time a link preview is made, that device is actually running out to the network and grabbing that preview from your server in a way that you can see. Now, when someone shares something on Facebook, the first time that someone shares something on Facebook, Facebook will go out to the network and grab that content, and then it stores it in a centralized fashion. And then every other time that link is shared on Facebook, Facebook doesn't go to your servers again. It just goes to its own copy of that information. And so, you could have a link that is going wildly popular on Facebook and only see one hit from it in your logs. That's a bummer. So what can you do? I think there's one simple pattern that I'd recommend people follow if they're interested in tracking this stuff, and I very much think you should be, which is to put unique resources into your OG image tags or into your OG video tags that are not the same resources that you have on the actual body of the page, so that you can tell when it's a microbrowser that's grabbing that, and are not the same previews that you're using between your pages, so that you can tell which pages are getting shared. If you do, again, you're not going to be able to see all that Facebook traffic, but let's assume that you're interested in figuring out which pages are getting shared. You can probably assume that the things that are popular on Facebook are also popular in iMessage or Slack or the things that actually do leave a mark. And then, you can look at your logs. If you use Cloudinary, you can actually look at Cloudinary's reports. Go into your console, hit the reports tab. You can either export a CSV, which is pretty cool, and gives you a little bit more information actually, or just scroll down in the UI and sort your top resources by requests. And if in this big long list of resources will be counts for how many times each of those microbrowser specific resources were shared and grabbed by decentralized browsers, microbrowsers like iMessage and WhatsApp. So that gives you some sense of what's going on, which is so much better than no sense at all. Because, word of mouth sharing like this is really priceless from a marketing perspective. And having information about what's getting shared and what's not is also just so valuable. Let's say you have some big campaign, you're promoting a few of your pages a lot on Facebook, driving a lot of clicks there, but no one's actually sharing those. Maybe, and you can look at this microbrowser information and see, what's actually getting traction person to person is not product A and B that we're putting all this marketing money behind. It's actually product D and product Z, right? And so you can make those things align better and actually throw the money behind the products that it's going to be most popular, where it's going to have the most effect. So being able to actually see what people care about, and the act of sharing something is really the act of caring about it. So again, I'm going to point you to Jason's talk for the third time to talk about why these microbrowsers are so important and why you should really be thinking about them. I'm going to steal one piece of data from his talk just because it's so cool. This chart of, Cloudinary looked at all of our accounts that had to do with food and restaurants and counted up all the microbrowser requests and aligned them by local time. So you can see when people are thinking and sharing things about food. It turns out to be not during breakfast, a little bit during lunch, and then a lot during dinner. And this was true before the current COVID-19 crisis. It is extra true after. I don't think this is because we're all going out to eat at restaurants more. I hope not. Yeah, I think it is because we're all sitting on our devices more. It's not for me to interpret this data. It's only to show it and to give you the sense of the kind of interesting things you can see and hint at some of the interesting questions you can ask of that data once you have it. All right. So that's all that I have. I hope you have enjoyed this session, learned a lot, and I hope that you go out and start thinking about and consciously designing all these microbrowser experiences. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of ImageCon 2020.